Video conferencing is, more and more, becoming the way we meet. With so many more people meeting virtually, the workspace, as it's designed now, presents a problem.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, and great to see so many people on to our 22nd edition of Insights Live. Today we're going to be exploring a topic which I personally find really interesting, and that's that move from corporate conformity into individuality. The pandemic has changed lots of things, but it's also opened up new conversations and enabled us to look at our workspaces in a new way. And so today with our panelists, we'll be unpacking their insights and experiences and learning more about how workplaces are changing to consider more for the individual, consider for the whole person. We just move to the next slide, Amanda. So today we have three panelists who will introduce themselves shortly, along with myself and Nick Stedman moderating. We have Don Watson from Oracle, Sonya Simmonds from Spotify, and Laura Guido-Clark from Love Good Colour. And we'd like to encourage participation today, so please be free to ask questions. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your questions, put them into the Q&A box, and we'll try and weave those into the conversation and get some answers from our panelists. So without further ado, Sonya, could you give us a little bit of an intro as to who you are and what you're working on right now?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Sonya. I'm Global Head of Design and Build at Spotify. I'm an interior architect by trade, and at the moment we're working on the reevaluation of our workplaces in what we call our dynamic workplace. And that's really an approach to redesigning our offices to suit and support the way in which we work. And with personalization as the kind of, I guess, one of the keys to this discussion today, is very much kind of based around how people are working and how we support the different ways in which we work, from HR to finance to legal to artist and label partnerships. So we're really defining that. And obviously, since the pandemic, we have now issued our work from anywhere, which is a choice in whether you choose an office mix or a home mix. And obviously the dynamic workplace kind of goes to bolster that or support that as our workplace mix.
Thanks, Sonya. That's great. And Don, please give us an intro.
Hello, everyone. Don Watson. I lead Oracle's Global Real Estate and Facilities Organization. I've actually been in that role since January of this year, so very new to Oracle. Prior to working for Oracle, I worked for Merck for 13 years, leading their Global Real Estate and Facilities Organization. It's great to be here, and I'm really looking forward to kind of just talking about different things that all of us are doing as we think about facility design and office design of the future. Just specifically from my background, I've always been very interested in how we're thinking about especially, that's also become very much more of a big conversation piece through COVID, as well as how we're thinking about the sustainability of our offices, and then even how we incorporate universal design principles into those builds, so we can make facilities that everyone can come and use. Thank you.
Thanks, Dom. That's excellent. And Laura.
Thank you so much. So my specialty is actually color, and I've kind of woven it through various aspects, from working with Fortune 500 companies on the expression of color materials and finishes on their product, to studying color for the last 9 years and creating a new color system that connects color with the senses. It connects color with impact. And I also have a nonprofit, and what we do is we go into under-resourced neighborhoods and we use color. We teach the kids in the community about color, and we manifest that into new design so that it is a reflection of their inner beauty.
Thank you, Laura. That's excellent. And Nick, do you want to give us an introduction?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Nick Stedman. I'm VP Marketing here at Space Store. I've been in the workspace interiors market for nearly 23 years now, but I've never seen anything happening quite like happening at the moment, both in terms of speed of change and implications for workspace design. So I am very excited to be co-hosting this panel today with Russell, and very much look forward to learning from our experienced panelists here today. And I'm here to learn really as much as our audience is too. So looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. And I'm Russell Kingston, and I lead the US side of our Space Store business. And this is a subject I'm very passionate about. I love the way that everything being upturned as it has been, whilst it's been very disruptive, gives us a new opportunity to reset our paradigms around the workplace and reset how we think about everyone that comes into a workspace as an individual, as a whole person, and what wasn't working before that we can take the opportunity to fix now and drive for a better place where we can actually empower everyone to do their best work. So with that, we'll kick straight into the conversation. And Sonya, if you could kick off for us, that would be great. Very interesting to hear what you've been doing at Spotify and how the program you've been working on has kind of stepped up to a new level with the recent events.
Yeah, sure. I think we started in 2019 with this reevaluation of our offices and doing a lot of data collection on utilization. And of course, that tells you like kind of one story, that that we're not utilizing our desks and our meeting rooms in the kind of correct way. I think we had a very open plan desking module of design, which meant that basically people felt quite awkward about taking conversations or taking meetings out in the open plan, and so would then dive into meeting rooms. And what we found was that meeting rooms were becoming oversubscribed and no one was sitting in the open office area. But we also knew that we had a lot of traveling that we were doing, which meant that when we went to other people's offices or our own offices, we couldn't necessarily find a place to sit because they were dedicated desking that wasn't being used by anyone else. So there are a lot of different parameters that were kind of playing into this, but effectively we were working from everywhere anyway. But we hadn't kind of solved the problem of our open area desking, which is basically wasn't being utilized in the right way. So we really evaluated that and asked everyone, all of the different business units, how do you work? How do you want to work? Does this really suit you? Or could we actually open up the office floor plate to offer you more choice in open meetings or open meeting areas, and also looking at focus areas and enabling a better kind of acoustic arrangement, because the open office area isn't really conducive to having private conversations. So I suppose that's kind of that's the dynamic workplace that we kind of started with, and that has kind of opened the door now to being able to look at all of our offices and reevaluate not only our utilization, but then how accessible are we? How neurodiverse friendly are we? Are we really kind of matching up our inclusive policies with inclusive design? And so that kind of, this project has really grown, not only in our bigger offices where we started it, but globally to envelop a whole new kind of design theory, I suppose. Throughout the offices, but also taking that into kind of reevaluating what we're saying with our offices. What are we saying with our brand? What are we saying with the way that it feels, comfort levels, all of that has really been reevaluated. And then the pandemic has obviously been a catalyst to us being able to refit a lot more offices within a relatively short amount of time, because people aren't in the offices.
Yeah, well, that's good. And I guess one of the things that you mentioned when we were just thinking about this webinar, which I thought was really interesting, is that the workplace perhaps has gone from being a kind of central core that everything's built around to being a supporter of your dynamic workplace program. I think that shift actually is a really interesting encapsulation of the change that's happening right now out there.
Yeah, and also like everyone, we've really kind of questioned what is our offices, or what are our offices used for, and it's very different in very different areas. Maybe where you have a new market and you need a new office, need an office to be that kind of sales point, or maybe you're having artists and labels in our kind of arena coming into the office, so you need it to have listening rooms or event spaces or gig areas or whatever you need. I think that we had to kind of reevaluate what is the need or the necessity of each of those offices and design appropriately, or change the design up to suit the new need.
Yeah, no, and as you're saying as well, around the conversations that you're having with your team, and the fact that we've been working at home so long, and our expectations, our habits, the things perhaps that we hold dear or important to us have changed, and it's really important to draw that out and not just to assume from the data, as you're saying. So that's
yeah, for sure. I think the comfort levels have gone up. We're quite used to having our cappuccino maker quite near us, and the acoustics of sofas and curtains and things like that. And I think that that's really important, that when we get back to the office, that we also have those kind of that comfort level. I think that it's a harsh reality when you go back to an open sea of desks, that's going to be difficult for people to get attuned to, and to make that kind of traverse back into the office.
Yeah, no, that's good. And Don, you mentioned that you're kind of in that discovery mode. Just tell us a bit about how it's working.
Yeah, so I think like a lot of companies, and probably like a lot of different people on this call, like pre-COVID, a lot of us within the real estate and facilities organization were taking a look at utilization rates, and really starting to see how people were working, and then thinking about, all right, how do we right size the footprint to match what we were doing? And whether I was with Merck or even in my current role at Oracle, both organizations were really going down that journey. Now, I think what, with COVID and, kind of, what you've heard many people talk about, the giant work from home experiment that has gone on, it's really started to shift how we think about reoccupying the office and what that might look like in the future. We are talking about being more flexible with our employees to, kind of really try to strike a great balance when we come back between kind of those benefits that people see from working at home versus this desire to come back to the office to meet with their teams or to collaborate. And, so from a facilities perspective, a lot of the things that we're starting to think about, and I think it's similar to some of the things that Sonya was even talking about, how do you think about collaboration space? How do you think about people getting together? How do you think about the IT tools that you're now going to have in your facility, given, that you're going to definitely enter a new world where you're going to have, maybe half the people in a meeting sitting in an office and half the people are going to be from home. And, what's that connection so that everyone's on a similar platform and working together? The other things that, kind of that we're starting to think through, is, how, what does the branding of our facilities look like? How do we use color and kind of design and natural light, and how do we think about, where we have large campuses where people can go outside and walk around, what are those walking trails looking like? And, how do you encourage people to, maybe hold meetings outside if that's something you can do, or utilize cafeteria space and cafe space for maybe more close meetings, while also then starting to still think through, post-COVID pandemic, there's still going to be some uncertainty and some concern over health and well-being and stuff like that. So how are we thinking about just making sure people have access to the different type of cleaning tools they need? And, what are we doing, just even from a facilities perspective, to show people that the environment is safe and clean as people get more comfortable coming back into the office. So, I think there's a lot of things that I think we were doing pre-COVID that were in line, but I definitely think there's more of a holistic discussion between kind of the real estate groups and the different business units that you may have on what does that real return to work look like, especially as we think about it in terms of, all right, are more people going to be working flexibly now? Will we have a smaller kind of assigned population, and will there be more people who now work remote? And then what are all of those implications is, kind of a journey that we're really starting to kind of think about. And then what, obviously as part of this discussion, what does that mean for the design of the facilities going forward?
Yeah, that's good. I think you both mentioned equity and inclusion, and as we kind of go into that experimentation, flexibility, everyone's speaking about the need to be flexible. We're not quite sure how it's going to work. We've got to try things out, but at the same time, we've got to bringing everyone with us and making sure that no one kind of gets left out the loop or has a bad experience is working with that. So that's a really key point you raised there, and spans a huge range of different needs. Laura, just give us an introduction to what you're working on right now and your thoughts around this whole subject.
Yeah, well, we're thinking very deeply, and while we're only thinking of this as one medium, it's one of the most powerful mediums. It's a language in and of itself. It's speaking before words. And one of the things that I think is very compelling about color is that it is a wavelength. And even if you don't see it, you feel it. And most people don't know that. We think of it only as visual. And when we think about inclusion, some of the things we think about are that 1 in 12 men, 1 in 200 women are colorblind. How are we compensating and understanding the role of color? And how are we using color to make our offices more compelling? How are we meeting the human need of each of the spaces? How do we bring individuality? So it means that we have to be thinking holistically about our color palettes and our offerings, and yet make people understand that it is part of their personal expression. Within our nonprofit project Color Core, we're always thinking about equity and inclusion. And I guess one of the things I think about is how do we as companies bring the larger community and connection to community and the needs of all the people into the office, where we feel like we're not just part of one space and one company, but the bigger whole, because I think the pandemic humanistically has taught us we are one. So those are the things that I think about.
Yeah, and you mentioned, Laura, and when we were speaking in preparation for this, about how it's made us all have more empathy for each other. And I think that very much links with this, because it means I think we all got a greater understanding of, we've had that insight, if you like, haven't we, into each other's lives, and perhaps some of it we've opened up to each other more. And therefore we have a greater understanding of the quite widely varying, sometimes, individual needs that everyone has to do their best work. And it's very important to be cognizant of that. So we've had a interesting question in from Claire Bacchus, which we'll put out there to the panel. And she said, I'm keen to understand if any of the panelists are moving away from corporate conforming measurement of success to individual success criteria that is aligned to the actual business that needs to get done, not the real estate success criteria of old. So that's quite an interesting question there.
I'll jump in. Honestly, I think that's going to be one of the more interesting things to see as we really start to reopen offices and see kind of what business decisions are being made in terms about how their employees are going to work. To me, there's a big element of TBD in that question, just because we're just really kind of getting right now, at least on that journey of kind of saying, okay, for this line of business, you've had, your employees have been working remotely for the better part of a year. When we come back to the office, will they still work remote? Will they come in, or will you have flexibility, or will they be assigned? And, I think in large part, the business is going to kind of drive that discussion, and really kind of in setting what those performance criteria might be. Now, I think, we'll partner with them. I think I think if I think about this from kind of a service mindset or enterprise leadership perspective within real estate and facilities management, we're here both also to provide the services of real estate and facilities, but also to partner with the business to really think about what's the best way to accomplish the enterprise objectives. So I do think there's a natural partnership that exists there that we'll be able to engage in, but, to really kind of, for me to at least kind of dig in and say, will the metrics be different? I think they will, because I think the way we're working is absolutely going to change. But what those might be, it's really too early for me to kind of say what that'll look like.
I think it might be a bit more varied as well. It might not just be, I think that if you are working with a dedicated desking system, then obviously every newcomer gets a new desk. That's how your portfolio grows. So I think that from a real estate point of view, obviously then with every newcomer, you have to then expand the amount of toilets, you have to expand the amount of exits, you have to expand all of those kind of very architecturally nerdy kind of boring stuff. But I think now it's more about, or it will open up a little bit more about the availability to do post-occupancy studies that really mean something, that people will want to dig into, because they'll either want to defend their space and create spaces, or tell you that they need a new space, say a new fitness area, or hey, wouldn't it be great if we had a gym here, or wouldn't it be great if we had a huge training area, whatever it is. So I think measuring it with sensors, obviously measuring, getting some data from the actual building of how it's going to be utilized would help. Gathering post-occupancy information, but we need people in the building to do that. And then obviously making a flexible design that can be changed up in the future, because at the moment we are designing something that possibly we don't have all of the answers for. So if we design flexibly, as in leaving open spaces and using more furniture items rather than building, it might leave us a bit more free to be able to change up those solutions as and when required.
Yeah, no, that all of those kind of data points we had before have been thrown up in there, and as you mentioned, Sonya, we need people there in the workspace to be able to get some meaningful data from it. So yeah, there's that very much that element of TBD, as you said, Dom, to kind of see what comes. But I think the preparedness to understand and take on board the concept that we have to look at things differently is crucial, isn't it? Right through the organisations that we're with. And there's a great question just come in from Kate, saying the word resiliency has come up a lot recently. In what ways are you working to make the workplace more resilient and able to adapt more rapidly to change? I think that's very interesting. Flexibility is coming up a lot right now. We have the kind of uncertainty. I was having a conversation with one of our clients the other day, and they said we're working with assumptions layered on top of other assumptions, and I think everyone's kind of in that space right now. And so, to throw this question out there: how are we working to make the workplace more resilient and able to rapidly change?
I think for us, it's maybe not just the workplace. I think it's also the communication, because communicating about or making people feel safe is obviously quite high on the list of priorities. But communicating about when the offices will reopen, how we will reopen them, how you will sit when you come back in, all of that kind of stuff that is kind of linked to the pandemic. But then also the communication of the company and how you want to kind of re-ascertain that that feeling of belonging. I guess that communication is key. It's not just kind of about what you can do with a resilient. I'm not sure if it's about resilient architecture. I just think that could be built in a much more flexible way, and then maybe offering much more choice, so that when people come in the office, you're not second guessing what they need. You're asking, not assuming. On maybe some people need bigger collaboration areas, but some people also maybe need focus areas if they're working at home and they can't concentrate. So I think it is about asking, and people seem to be much more open about wanting to get involved.
Yeah, that's good.
I also want to bring up one thing about in terms of layering color, that what we do is we're looking at everything in terms of human need. And we're working with large companies and programming each of their spaces and understanding how color can help meet those needs. And we're meeting needs that we've never, ever had to do before, like safety and resiliency. Some of the questions that you're, people calling in are inquiring about resiliency. These are very important things that we've never addressed. And I mentioned in our pre-talk that in the United States, in the schools that I've been working with, action safety has been a huge issue, and the kids want to feel safe. And this was something that in an office we didn't have to think about as much. And so we're looking at those in our programming of how we apply color, and we are measuring post-occupancy. Did we meet those needs? Because it's important, and it's really about the humanity of it. It's about all of us feeling, like you said, Sonya, that we belong, and Don, how you're talking about, this is a very big thing culturally. They belong to your companies, they're part of your companies, but they also want to feel like they're compelled to come back or to work in different ways because they want to be there.
I think that's really interesting, that point you mentioned there as well, and Laura, about safety, and how we need to be aware that some of those base hygiene factors, the base needs that we have as human beings, have been changed. Sorry, Don.
The other thing I was going to say, I think, when I think about resiliency and facility design, and, even kind of building on some of the health and safety things, I start to equate this to, if you're designing from a universal design perspective, which is, really kind of looking and thinking about, how am I designing this space for someone who might be neurodiverse, or someone who's in a wheelchair, or someone who might be blind or deaf? I think you automatically then start building resiliency into your facility designs, which allows it to change and be accessible for everyone at any given time. And that's a continuum. You're constantly learning and reevaluating and learning new things and building that into your facility. But I honestly do believe that if you really kind of approach your design criteria from that perspective, you naturally start to build in resiliency into what you're doing. And that's looking at your exits and what your IT is going to do and how people are going to interact with it. It's looking at color schemes of how you're changing zones or making sure that you can do all of those things. So it really does start to bring all of kind of the elements that we're talking about together. And then you really do truly create that facility that anyone can come in at any point in time and really, really use and be successful and thrive. But you're also constantly getting feedback from your post-occupancy surveys. I agree with Sonya. I think those are going to I think people are going to fill those out probably more than they ever have. And we're probably going to get a lot more feedback than maybe we actually are going to be wishing for. But I do think there's going to be a lot more engagement from our people on those things. And I think all of that is going to be great data as we really continue to evolve and think about what a facility should look like and how people will interact with it.
Yeah, I do think we have a responsibility as well to kind of up the stakes a little bit, not just to do what is legally required in one country versus another.
Exactly.
I think that's something that we've been really looking into, is how, because you can write your accessibility guide for architecture or for your buildings in one sense for each of the countries and just say, okay, you have to fulfill what is legally required. But if you actually up that and say, this is where our standard lies, and we want to always go from that point, and it comes down to even choosing buildings in good places with with thought behind it. And I think it's not just about the choosing, it's about how you fit it out, the materials you use, the sustainability that you drive, all of those kind of elements, as well as the accessibility. And as you said, like kind of designing for neurodiverse environments. If you can do that, that benefits everyone, upping the acoustic values in the space, but also looking at all your wayfinding so that it's not all in caps locks, which is difficult for dyslexic users to read. So it can be all of those little nuances that you really have to work hard at designing so that it is completely accessible, working with contrasting colors so that it's easier to use. And I think it's quite often that someone is working on something else with our platform and I see something that's like, oh, it's all about contrast, and how can we then mirror that in the interior? So that inclusive policy matching and the inclusive design is super, super important now. And it gives a very strong message to whoever's coming to the office as well, that this is going to be easy for you to use this space. We're going to do everything we can to enable you to have, maximum enjoyment and maximum comfort from this space. I think that's going to be a driving factor, because if we don't do that, I don't think people will want to use the space. So I think that's something that we've got to work really heavily now. I don't think it's about having to tempt people back into the space, because I think people will want to come into an office anyway. If they don't want to, they won't. So I think it's more of, and it's as much about your visitors as it is about your employees or even your new employees. So we're not just thinking about people coming back into the office, we're thinking about maybe people that we don't have any idea of or any control about, or we can't give them an occupancy study to find out what they would want from an office. So I think there's, just making it, as Don said, accessible to everyone is really a key.
That's very interesting. I just got a question for the panel here. If you're designing a space for diversity, are you finding that you would give an inferior experience to other users of that space, or do you think you can truly design a space that works for everybody?
I think you can elevate the space, to be honest. I think it's got a lot to do with, I think there are basic needs that you need to fulfill, obviously, but then there are kind of layered on top of that. There's how you use, going back to other things that we've discussed first, about color and about welcoming and about belonging and all of that, kind of understanding what this business is trying to say. Because at the end of the day, we're designing offices. We need to mirror what is that, embody what that brand is about within this physical space. So I think it's, if you're working with an inclusive brand, you need to say that within your building. But I think it benefits everyone. Personally, I think that reassessing acoustic lighting, accessibility, sustainability, all of those can only benefit us.
That's very interesting. Well, Don, what's your view on that? No, we're not hearing you, Don.
Laura, did you want to jump in on? So I saw you looked like you wanted to jump in there.
No, please, Don, go, and then I'll go after you. It's all good.
Honestly, I agree with Sonya. I mean, the only thing I would say, there's a cartoon that I've seen that kind of it's in the middle of a snowstorm, and there's a ramp and there's stairs and there's kids waiting to go into school, and the person who's going to shovel is going to start shoveling the steps first. And the cartoon basically says, well, if you shoveled the ramp first, all of us could use it. And that to me is the power of kind of designing from a universal perspective, as we talked about, and thinking through those things, is that you do enhance it for everyone, as Sonya said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Sorry, go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that's exactly what we find in each and every one of the schools and the community centers that we work in, is that because we're so deeply steeped in their needs and in inclusivity, that they're beloved by the community because they're an expression of who they are. And consequently, we've never been tagged. Disruptive behavior, they've documented has reduced. So I think that when you feel part of something and when you're designing for everyone, as Sonya says and Don says, we're elevating everything, and I think that's critical.
It's sort of sad that it's kind of it's accessible design has been like limited to, especially when you think about like neurodiversity, has been limited to schooling and to hospitals. And now I think that just opening up the workplace, it has to happen. It's not really acceptable anymore not to design like this.
Yeah, it's one of the things you mentioned, Sonia, which I thought was very interesting when we were speaking before this, is that the only place we can actually give full equity is the workplace, because it's the only place we can completely control. You know, you can't control what someone has in their own home. So it really elevates the importance, doesn't it, of the workplace? Yes, it's only one piece of the whole picture, but it's a crucial kind of binding part. We've had a really interesting question here from Jill. And could you talk about anything you've seen as lost as an organization during this period, if anything? So have your organizations lost anything during the pandemic, if anything?
I can just, I mean, I in my introduction, I said, you know, I joined Oracle 4 months ago. I've met 2 people on my leadership team in person. Everything I've done has been via Zoom. And that's really been the extent of it. You know, I did have a couple of opportunities to travel to a couple of our locations, but, you know, for me, you know, that ability to really engage and go to the different regions and see what people are doing and understand how things are working, that, you know, I've felt that more as I've been transitioning. You know, I'm getting a flavor for everything that's going on and what we're doing. But they're really, you know, and it is what it is right now. But I think that is something that I'm absolutely feeling is really has been a loss with this.
Yeah, face-to-face communication, I guess, is. I think we've also lost a bit of we do a lot of surveys and we've talked a lot about belonging and culture. I don't think we've lost the culture so much, but I think we're very good at communicating out what we're doing, which is awesome. But I think it is something that can rapidly disappear in a company, is the sense of belonging. Because if you have newcomers coming into the office and you're still a growing company, that is something you really have to take care of. How are you going to educate everyone? How are you going to? You can't meet 1,000 people in a Zoom call and kind of make that physical, that really nice connection. I guess the face-to-face meeting, and also just, I mean, I'm working with contractors quite a lot, and I'm working with architects. I'm working with a lot of different people, not just internal stakeholders. And I think that obviously you want to keep everyone as buoyant and as happy as possible, but sometimes there are dips in energy. And I think that energy that you kind of create of being in an office or going to see an office or being with each other in reality, and the exciting bits of kind of designing an office as well, you know, seeing it on site, all of those kind of small things that kind of get you excited. I mean, I think my team's living rooms look like sample studios at the moment because we have all of our samples sent home. But it's you know, those things where you can kind of chat through design and chat through ideas and whiteboard. That's just a little bit more hard to replicate. But I'm speaking sort of mostly from my work point or viewpoint, I suppose, at work.
Yeah, I would say that's one of our bigger challenges, dealing with color and material and finish, is remotely it's very difficult, and we even just trying to get samples for everyone, that's very challenging right now. So I also think it's about energy and maintaining that sense of energy and connection, and I think that part is important. And so we learn new ways of connecting, and sometimes even, you know, the most simple things like starting off not by talking about work, but how everyone is doing. And like I said, seeing little kids running through spaces like always warms my heart, or dogs barking. It's the humanity of it. I think we've gained an empathy, but we've had to work harder on the kind of connections that we had at work, and also the protocols of being able to do our work in ways that we were used to doing it.
You spoke, Laura, before this as to how we need to have a much deeper understanding of programming our spaces for how we want people to feel. It's got to find balance in it to get that without kind of ramming it down people's throats, as it were. just say something about that.
Well, I just feel like, programming spaces for people's needs is critical. It's not just about the brand. The brand essence always has to be there, but how people are working and what we're doing to accommodate those human needs and how they're all different is highly critical. So for us, that's one of the most important things. And we had this lovely talk about brand colors, and this tendency pre-pandemic to sometimes say, well, let's just use our brand colors. And the brand color is way better served when it's used strategically and in the right place. You understand the brand than it is everywhere, because it isn't an appropriate need. It's not meeting the needs of the people if the brand colors everywhere. So those are the types of things that we all had such, great storytelling about. And like Sonya said, like her color, the Spotify color can easily be shown in greenery than in an color, and it gives you another way of looking at the brand. It's a humanistic point of the brand.
I think that's something we talked about yesterday, was that we have our Spotify green, which is beloved. It's a very poppy color and it means a lot to everyone, but when we were looking at the experiential design last year, we actually reevaluated the whole lot. We kind of said, okay, this is awesome that we have all of these colors that we use within our brand association or brand awareness. But when they're on the platform, when they're on an app, it looks amazing and it really pops out. But when it's in a space, it's quite overwhelming. And so just looking at those colors and actually maybe taking like using a gradient of those colors instead of, or using more muted versions of those colors, can give you the same sense of, oh, I'm actually in this space that talks about color, but it doesn't necessarily have to be kind of, so brash that it's making you feel like I don't want to be in this space anymore. So I think it's just about, the amount of color you use as well. It doesn't have to necessarily come through on every single piece of furniture or every single wall. It could be that you use it in certain places or spaces where you want to feel different things. So it's very emotive color. And then I think the lighting also has a lot to do with it. And we talked a lot about texture as well. So that the layers of transparency through curtains or meeting rooms or spaces. If you have a focus room, you want it to be all enveloping and very comfortable. But if you want a collaboration space, naturally that has a lot of whiteboards in it. So there are different ways of using color, I think, within the interior. But for me, it's got a lot to do with the different fabrics and finishes that you're using in the whole space to make one holistic story, not just using color for color's sake, which I think is a tendency. It's kind of like, oh, this room looks really boring. Let's paint this wall. That kind of use is really upsetting in the sense that someone hasn't really kind of thought through the whole story. But yeah, I mean, and also people are very emotive about color. What I like, maybe not what someone else likes. So it's
I think this is one of the bigger areas of fun in facilities management, is to really start thinking through, not the color schemes. How are you exhibiting the company's history and culture, and how are you bringing all of those things together? I think it's one of the more interesting facets of what we do, because there is just that whole element of creativity that's there. But, also, how are you thinking about in terms of, creating the right type of environment for people to come in, and, whether you're using color, whether you're using corporate branding, whether you're using company history, whether you're using a customer journey or story. I just think there's so many options and things that we can do in that space. In addition to a lot of the other things we've already talked about in terms of how you're using natural light and plants and other things to, just kind of create that healthy type of well feeling in an environment.
That's interesting. There's a good question here from John, which leads on from what you're saying there, Don. I'm curious to see how the group views the impact of space on recruiting and retention. So what's your views on that?
I think if you're recruiting, it's an interesting one, because a lot of, that's onboarding now is virtual, I guess.
Yes.
Or even recruiting is virtual. And maybe it should be from the standpoint that that's the most equitable way to do it. Especially if you're recruiting from anywhere, the necessity to come to a space shouldn't be the thing that, you know, that kind of drives whether you would get the job or not. But I think when you're designing a space, you want that, or I would like to have the space embody the culture and the brand, so much so that you don't really have to ask too many questions, or you don't have to go on that self-discovery, or you don't have to look up many files or flip through a lot of information. You kind of want to know what that company is saying when you kind of walk in the door.
With that not available at the moment, do you think they'll revert back to using the space, the workspace, more as a key recruitment tool? Do you think that's one key thing that we're missing here?
Yeah, I think it could be. I definitely think that like the onboarding could be done. I think it has to be done in an equitable way if you're going to have a distributed workforce. So you need to have the availability to do it in both ways. But maybe again, it's about the communication of the spaces, and maybe we need to be better. It's maybe something that facilities teams haven't done in the past so much, because you could just see the space that you were walking into, or it was on a website, or it was on a jobs page, or whatever it was. And now I think we have to communicate very much what we're doing with our spaces in a much more open way, to say, hey, this is a project we just finished. This is an office you might not be able to see, but this is what we're doing with this office. So I think it's a lot about communicating what spaces are available, and then also recruiting through that. Because if you can choose to work from London, but you live in Spain, you would want to see what that London office looks like. So I think that there's a lot of communication to be done on the part of facilities management now that's possibly wasn't done before.
That's excellent. A good question just coming from Jordan. How does design promote and elevate the sense of community? So we've spoken about, you know, one of the things we've lost being, we lost some of that human connection. We've perhaps lost some of the sense of belonging, and definitely the ability to kind of rub shoulders with our colleagues face to face. I think it's an interesting question. How does design promote and elevate that sense of community, especially as we come back to the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, from my experiences, some of the most used parts of the facility to bring back community were always in the amenity spaces, whether it was in, you know, kind of the coffee break area, or, you know, even in the cafeteria. You would see, you know, that where you had the informal interactions that were kind of, you were striving for, those were the ones where I always saw kind of, you know, the biggest bang for creating that community space. You know, it's one of the reasons why when I think about a lot of, you know, when we think about the campuses that we have in Oracle that do have the outdoor space where people can go out and exercise and walk around, well, how do you turn that into a place where, you know, people may want to go have, you know, an informal meeting, or just kind of meet colleagues and chat while, you know, or, you know, be able to sit and make sure that they have access to IT and, you know, the internet and other things to do their job. So I honestly think that the community piece, really, you build that through a lot of the informal type of spaces that you're going to have, that you know, again, and that might depend on the size of your facility and what you can do. There's lots of considerations there, but I think that's an important piece from the community perspective.
I think that multi-layering it as well might be more up and coming. So we have a lot of stages where people hold all hands from, but if that space can also be curtained off and be a yoga space for an hour in the morning, or become an area where people can group together in a different training facility, I think that multi-layering of spaces will become kind of more relevant, especially as hopefully, I think in the future you could kind of book spaces for certain events as you come into the office. Maybe you're not coming in every day. So I think that the elevation, as you said, definitely comes through like the wellness facilities that you have, or being able to take, you know, those kind of moments of the day, food, coffee, meeting spontaneously. Where do you do that, and how do you kind of elevate those moments?
That's interesting.
I would just say the challenge is how do we incorporate the bigger community, not just our work community? Because one of the things that I have learned in my nonprofit work, that if you drive 13 miles, that's it. There are places that are in need and that are under-resourced, and they are part of our community. And so one of the things that that I'm learning is how big our community really is and how vital it is that we all feel part of it.
That's good. I am. It's a slight segue from that, but it's another question is coming from Dino: is how does the world standard play a role in corporate interiors, and what importance do you give it?
For us, it's important, but it's not as important to get the certification as it is to work with all the parts of the world strategy. So if you can up your sustainability and you can up the health of your kind of environment, all of those things need to kind of like be in a good balance to create a great workplace. But I would say for us, it's not necessarily about the certification, but more understanding how healthy our business is, but how healthy our offices are, and getting the right kind of data from all of that, and then upping the levels of what you want to do next. So designing more accessibly, all of those kind of things, but also, well, does depend quite a lot on what your company benefits are and standards are anyway. Yeah. So I think it all kind of meshes together.
Yeah, I would agree with Sonya. I think it's not about the certification. It really is about how do you build all of these different elements of, well, sustainability. I think Laura started talking about the corporate social responsibility piece in terms of how are you interacting with the community. And I think all of those things really have to come together for a good facility design.
And at the end of the day, Sonya, you're speaking about, it's not exactly about making people come to the workplace. If they want to be there, they will. So we've got to if we want people in the workplaces for any given reason, we've got to make it easy for them to get what they need and do what they need to there, and easier than it would be just working from their home.
And maybe give them some choice as well. Choice in what they have, maximum choice, I think.
Yes. I love what you said there, just going back a bit about, maybe you've got a staging area that becomes a yoga space. So letting individuals, they can edit space, they can play with it, they can make it do what they need it to do. I think that's a really important part of the whole flexibility piece, giving that choice.
Yeah, I think hacking your own space will become more and more part of the future, especially as we can book spaces through apps or whichever medium you're going to decide for your company. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how people want to hack spaces, and how, like going back to the beginning of the talk, how involved people will want to be in redefining what the office looks like in the future.
Because we've all actually, in home work environments, we can hack it, can't we? We can do what we like in our homes. And as you say, I think it'd be very interesting if that then translates into a much greater interest and engagement into how our workspace is.
I think Don and I are probably thinking, well, we've got to control this chaos somehow. So maybe we give them some kind of kits and parts.
Yep, exactly.
But I think what's interesting about the question is that in healthcare design, because there is a lack of control, right, in your body and ailing in some way, they found that when you have a sense of agency, you actually heal faster. So when you can control your lighting, when you can control certain things, the healing element is faster. And now that we have lost control in some ways, which as a world we have, perhaps that sense of agency is going to be more important, and we'll need to find new ways for us to assert our needs in the workplace.
One of the questions that's come in is interesting here is, can you describe some of the technologies that have come in during the pandemic, and which ones do you believe will stick around beyond the pandemic? It's an interesting one. We were touching on technology, weren't we, prior to this discussion? Any thoughts on that one, Don? It's a key part.
Well, I think the big one for me, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, is that we're definitely going to have to look at the video conferencing equipment that we have in our offices versus what we've been using as we've all been working from home. And we're going to have to make some changes there because the new reality is going to be, you're going to have large meetings and you're going to have some people who are going to be in the office and you're going to some people who are going to be at home. And, I think you have to be able to see each other. I think earlier we were talking about empathy and kind of the new things. One of the biggest frustration points in the past, if you were not in the meeting room and you were on video or on phone, was trying to figure out how to get recognized or talk. And I think this, just kind of this whole environment has created a much better opportunity. And I think something that we're going to have to really be mindful of is that people are going to be working from a flexible remote standpoint. And so they're going to have access to those meetings and those discussions. And, the IT equipment's going to have to match what you're using at work versus what people are using at home to really ensure that you do get that full balance of ideas and conversation. And I think that's something that we're all more aware of now, having just kind of thinking about how things went in the past and what we think we need to do in the future. So for me, that's a big one.
Yeah, it's the same for us. I think just making an equitable platform. So basically, if you think about it in its rawest terms, at the moment we have a whiteboard and we have a screen in a meeting room. It might be that in the future we have a digital whiteboard and we have a screen with another screen next to it, one screen showing the presentation, but the other screen showing everybody's faces on it in an equitable way. I'm not a technologically advanced by any means, but I think that also having 360 cameras to be able to ensure that everyone is seen and everyone is recognized. And I think that we talked a little bit about it yesterday, that it might even open up even further and become a way to onboard people or to kind of piggyback into meetings so that you learn through the meeting or you learn some kind of mentorship through the meeting. So I think, I think it's got a lot, the tech has to catch up with the spaces, I think. So whilst we were designing flexible spaces and spaces that you can hack yourself or whatever it is, the tech obviously has to be there. And maybe for the moment, we don't know what's going to stick around. So it might be just smart to kind of do that in a flexible way and trial some stuff. And feel free to fail with it and move on quickly.
Yeah, it's interesting. On the subject of flexibility, is another question here around the spaces in your own organisations. How quickly or how often do they need to change? Is that happening on a daily or weekly or monthly basis?
From my point of view, I think that you have spaces that kind of can like kind of stand the test of time, like meeting rooms. They don't need to be changed that often because they're quite well used, especially like kind of 2 to 4 person meeting rooms who they get the biggest kind of percentage of use. It might be the bigger areas, the much more kind of like the multitasking areas, like the stages or the kind of all hands areas, those spaces that might be empty, or food hall areas, those kind of areas that you might want to have like a secondary use for, rather than just kind of devoting it to one use. You might want to multi-use. So I would say that those are the most the spaces you would like to change. But you might bring in things like moving partitions or storage or furniture to be able to do that, so it's easy for you to change out. And then I would say like you need that post-occupancy level again to be able to tell you when it's time to change it, with that kind of backup of data from sensors or whatever you have, whichever tools you're using in your office environment.
Yeah, Don?
I similar. I think that's something you have to be careful with. I mean, I think you have to think through the space and the design. There's a financial stewardship piece to all of this that comes in. So you can't be switching things in and out, just on a yearly basis. It's just not a financially feasible thing to do. But I think if you think about a lot of the different design principles that we've talked about today and mentioned, I do think you end up future-proofing things, and you also then are designing with an element of flexibility so that you can, in a cost-effective manner, change things to really meet the needs of the business.
Good, no, thank you, Don. And unfortunately, we've run to the end of our hour. It's been a great conversation. Thank you very much to Sonya and Don and Laura for sharing their insights, and I wish we could carry on, but we've come to our time. And thank you to all of you in the audience. We've had some great questions in today, and I'm sorry we didn't manage to get to quite all of them, but we trust you found it insightful. There is a link just coming into the chat box now to give you a link for our next panel webinar on the 6th of May. So please sign up. We'd love to see you again. And thank you to all of you again. Have a great day or evening, whichever time zone you're in.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.